you guys heard of the shake test? It's one of those troubleshooting methods that you do not need specialty tools for. You can do it at home, in your garage, driveway, or whatever with simple tools. All you have to do is raise the end of the car that you're trying to troubleshoot or isolate a problem on. For example, this is the front left wheel of my vehicle. One of the easier ones to do is putting your hands at 9 and 3 o'clock like this and shaking. If you hear any clunking noises, it could be your bearing, but it is most likely a problem with your tie rod end. This one here is an outer tie rod end. You do have an inner tie rod as well, and this component here is what steers your wheels to the left and to the right. If you do a 12 and 6 o'clock this way, or diagonally, basically avoiding the outer tie rod end, that's how you're more likely to isolate a bearing problem. This is an example of a wheel bearing. It's one of those modern cartridge style wheel bearings. You do not have to press anything, you do not have to pack anything. All you do is remove the bolts that attach it to your steering knuckle. So that's pretty nice, right? So, but obviously you're watching this video or you're at this level because you already suspect that you have a bearing problem. Bearing problems usually manifest as rumbling noises, whining noises, howling. It's basically a very unnerving sound, and it happens no matter whenever you're in motion. It doesn't matter whether you were on the gas or braking. As long as your wheels start moving, even down the hill, you're going to hear some rumbling noises coming from either the front or the back. In this case, the video that I'll be recording after this will be on a 2011 Nissan Altima, a 4-cylinder. The problem started when the driver hit a curb, and problems just started from there. So this is the bearing that came out of there. Hopefully the video that follows is helpful in a way. All right.
Well, let's gain access now, shall we? By the way, I tried to use that clock for timing purposes. It didn't really pan out the way I intended it to be. Now first loosen your lug nuts, and now lift your car. Remember, the jack lifts, but the jackson secures. And once you have it at a height that's comfortable for the task you're planning to do, you can now fully remove all the lug nuts. I'm using my power tool here, favorite tool. So with the wheel out, the main goal now you have is to, one, remove the brake caliper, this one right here, and the 2 bolts that you need for that. There's another one here. These are 22s, if I remember correctly. Yes, 22s. You need to remove the ABS sensor over here. It's one of the first things, so you don't damage it. 10mm, we'll get that one out. Then, right here, remove your cotter pin, then your axle nut, and I think that's must be a 32, but I'll check that. I'll confirm that later. Then remove this, and you'll be able to see your bearing. The bearing now has bolts on the other side, but we cannot really see them because this is what you see. Your bearing has the wheel studs over here, and then on the back side you have these. You have 4 of those, and I think that's a 17mm in the back. And what thing you should pay attention to is orientation of your bearing when you install it, and that's something I can talk about from the other bearing. Anyway, so let's get to work.
So I decided to go ahead and break those bolts loose, those 22mm bolts. In retrospect, looking back, it would have been way easier if I just turned this wheel my way. But I'm just used to working like this, so I didn't think of it. But in the later parts of the video, I actually thought about it, and I had the wheel turned so that you can see what I was doing to the best of my ability. The video doesn't really capture very well over here. But yeah, just get your leverage and break those bolts loose. Use your socket. I don't think an open-end wrench or any kind of wrench fits in there very well. Maybe just the bottom one, but you know, just gather your 22mm tools and see how you can make it work. Now, with the bolts loose, you want to be careful and don't damage your brake hose. I mean, that was the whole premise of us removing the hose clip. Some people use wires or cable ties, but I use a jug as a platform to keep mine secure and safe.
For the cotter pin, the principle is simple. All you want to do is just bend those legs on one end, then push or pull it out the other end. Depending on how stiff or corroded your cotter pin is, sometimes it might be easier to use a flathead screwdriver and a hammer, but set of pliers works very well for me. Look at that. Okay, so we have confirmed that it is indeed a 32mm nut over there. So the deeper the socket, the better it is, because some of these axle stubs stick out quite far. Plus, you obviously need a breaker bar for leverage. I think I have the responsibility of also sharing this. Some people prefer to use a different method where you do not remove the brakes yet. All they do is remove the cotter pin, then put the wheels back on, and then the thinking is this, that when you have it sitting on the wheels and using the tires and the brakes, you're not putting all the force onto the transmission like I'm doing right now. I don't think it's that big of a deal for such a car, but something I should share. Also, oh, by the way, instructions say that you should not reuse this nut. Buy a new one when you do this job. Now that the brake caliper has been removed, as well as the brake rotor and the cotter pin, which was here, as well as the axle nut, we are almost ready to remove the bearing. But then remember, I told you one important thing, you do not want to forget this because it will get damaged, is this one right here. This is the ABS sensor. And it said it's a 10mm. After I removed the nut, the bolt, sorry, you'll see why it's important to remove this. See the way it looks like, right? Then let's reinsert it. And I want to give you a peek of what it looks like inside. Look at it from the back side over there. Here's an ABS sensor going in and out. All right, so remember, pull this one out, secure it. Let's pull this part first. Allow me to share my thoughts as to why you should do everything in your power to protect this. One, it is rather expensive, maybe $100 or so if you damage it and end up having to replace it. But why should you have to do that? Secondly, it is rather simple to not damage it, just a 10mm bolt and out it goes. So why wouldn't you? Well, there's a caveat. People that live in areas with a lot of rust and corrosion, it's almost inevitable that you're going to end up damaging something in the way of removing this. So all I can say to you guys is good luck. Third is safety. This wheel speed sensor over here is it controls a lot of your safety and stability systems. That is your anti-lock braking system, ABS, your traction control system, TCS, and VDC, vehicle dynamic control system, depending on how your car's set up. And these systems basically utilize intelligence and reaction times that most human beings do not possess to make sure that you do not get into an accident. They make sure that your car stays on the road and goes where it's supposed to go, especially in low traction conditions like snow and rain. But all that talk is good, but I think that's subject for a different time, a different video. For now, we're going to try to go back to this bearing that we're dealing with here. There you go. Now we're almost ready to get this. We need 17mm bolts in the back. 17mm sockets. As I said, you have, here's one of them, here's the other one, but just believe that you got 4 of these back there, and you also have some down there. Here's one, the other one is on the other side. So that's what we're gonna do. So obviously I got to work to try to loosen these bolts back there using a breaker bar, 17mm. Space is kind of tight, so I had to kind of give it up and asked my brother to turn the wheel, and I was able to get way more clearance to get in there. Still, it doesn't mean it was very easy, because see, I'm using swivel joints over here to try and get it, which did, right? And the power tool obviously helps. And he did the same thing, turned it the other way, and I was able to gain a little more access. It's a little tighter back there with more components in the way, but still, after taking about double the time it took for the front, I was able to remove those bolts, and again, used my power tool, and I removed them. Alright, that's cool, thank you. Okay, now we're going to remove the bearing, and there are many ways to achieve the same task. You'll see that I go ahead and use a piece of wood over here, making sure I can clear the studs, bang on that using my hammer. And the reason to do that is to protect my threads. You do not want to damage those threads. which is pretty much the reason some people leave the axle nut on there, so that when they bang on it, they're banging on the axle nut rather than the stud itself. And I believe actually for some different kinds of bearing pullers, you have to have it on there so that it doesn't slip out. As you can see, I'm definitely not the kind of guy that's going to use a bearing puller. I'm using a hammer, or more accurately, a bottle jack. And leaving the axle nut helps in such a situation, by the way, in case you bang it so hard it doesn't jump all the way out at you. The axle nut will hold it. And I have to warn you, by the way, I'm making it look way simpler than it is. That's because it's about the 4th time I've done it. When you actually do it after thousands of miles, it's going to be way harder. At this point, you should pay attention to this. That should be clocked in 3 positions. You got this, this, and the drain at the bottom. Depending on which side you want to install it, this bearing can be used on the right and the left. On the right side, the ABS sensor is going to come in through here. On the left side, the ABS sensor is going to go in through there. If you buy a factory original piece, it might have a piece of plastic blanking off whatever port does not need to be used. But typically, you got the two slots up top and the drain at the 6 o'clock position. So when you install this, it's going to go in this way, and then watch this peek out. And then when you install the ABS sensor, it comes in through this point over here. You see it coming in and out. So if you do not remove your ABS sensor before removing your wheel bearing, as you can see, the ABS sensor is going to be inside one of these holes, say this one here, and then when you pull it out, you're going to end up breaking it. And that's how people ruin the ABS sensors while trying to do the job. So just pay attention, remove that first, and install it back last, okay? Hope that makes sense. Okay, now comes installation. You'll notice that I do not use my power tool much over here because I do not want to run the risk of cross-threading something and having to ruin it. So be careful and patient. And then remember, during installation, install this one first. And you might have noticed that I straightened this one out before putting it back in. It's kind of important that you do that, because if you tried to, well, you turn the knuckle for ease of removal, but if you try to install this with the knuckle straight up, it might be a little bit of a hassle to get it perfectly aligned. So it's just something to look out for. I like doing it in its neutral position so it's not really bent in any one direction. Alright, so make sure your splines match up and it should be able to go in. This is your new one. As I said, pay attention. This one looks a little different. As you can see, the holes are not just cutouts, they are all the way in. And this looks slightly different, if I must say. Yeah, just slightly. I don't know what the deal is, but that's how it came to us from the vendor. Obviously, this plastic cap cannot go in here. It's not the same model, same make or whatever, but so we're not going to blank anything off, but we'll be able to reinstall this one back. Okay, so first make sure the splines match up. And there you go. The splines do match up. So now we can proceed to install it. You don't really have to sweat the alignment too much, because this is the part that gets bolted, as I said, right? And this is the part that turns. As you can see, they can move independently, so don't you worry too much about getting them aligned. Just install this over the splines of the axle, and then you can use this to get it centered the way it should be. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and use the bolts in the back side of the bearing. The bolts go like this and bolt onto the hub, and that's how you hold this onto your steering knuckle. So that's what I'm going to do in the back. The strategy is simple. Just slide the bolt through to hold the brake dust shield first. Then I'm going to use the bolts to pull it slowly. Make sure everything is aligned. Don't try to force anything. And the bolt, I'm going to use the top and the bottom one to pull the bearing closer. That's it. this is what's happening on the back side.
So what I'm doing here is doing my best to hand tighten it. I'm just going to pull it back and I keep looking at the front side of it, make sure that the bearing is actually being pulled any closer to it, and do the same top bottom. It feels right. It doesn't feel like I'm forcing anything.
And then you have holes back here. This is where the first bolt goes into. The second one goes right here.
And again, I did the same thing on the back, hand tightened those bolts, and pretty soon you'll see me using my power tool. I'm not using it as an impact driver, it's just a repetition, save my wrists, I'm aging, man. And the rear has way less excess, and I did my best to use my breaker bar, but even with swivel joints, I wasn't really getting all the way there, so I had to ask for help, have that help turned my way, and there you go. I'm able to get a little more access to the back. It's not perfect, but better than what I was doing earlier. And, when you're ready to tighten it to spec, good practice says that you should use a torque wrench. So here what I'll tell you is do as I say, not as I do. And just look the other way, assume I'm using a torque wrench. And click. We are perfect. The torque is good. And then I should have it turned. I'll do the same thing on the front. Again, get ready to torque it to spec, and my torque wrench says that I'm doing very well. It's now time to reinstall the axle nut, and for that there's very little risk of cross-threading here, but I just prefer to use hand tools. And when it comes to the matter of final tightening, again, some people prefer to have the wheel back on, lower the car onto the ground, then do the final tightening. I prefer to do it just the way I did on the way out, with everything still accessible and in the air.
Either too tight and too loose.
And now, the cotter pin. Do the exact opposite of what you did. You might need pliers, you might not. You will need your pliers. Go for it.
And now, after installing that, well, before tightening the hell out of it, I should have checked. But you want to confirm that you can see the hole all the way in there, that there's no blockage. That is to ensure that indeed you can read the ABS sensor can go through there into its hole. So now I'm going to install the ABS sensor. It's also called the wheel speed sensor. There you go. Went nice and smooth, no problems. Let's record it from the other side again. That is the ABS sensor bong. I don't know if you can see it because it's sneaking in. Okay, so insert the ABS sensor. There you go. So make sure it goes in. Again, remember, remove the ABS sensor before working with anything here. And I like to install it way at the end after everything is done, so that it's not experiencing any unnecessary knocking, tapping, banging, and all that kind of impact. So yeah, let's go ahead and secure that in. Remember your other clips over here. Here. Then tighten this one down and you should be done with the back.
Well, I saw an opportunity to talk about lug studs, and I was showing my brother how you can remove them without, disassembling the whole car.
You see this cutout over here? On the brake, I don't know if we talked about it. Yeah. Basically, when you want to replace these studs, you don't have to remove the whole thing, turn it upside down. You align it with that hole and then bang it out. Then it's going to come out through here. What I'm not sure is if you can do it with the brake back on, with the brake installed or not. But yeah, the bearing is something that, you'd rather not mess with, not for fun, I'm going to bother you again to turn it this way.
And now we're getting ready to reassemble the brake caliper and bracket over the brake rotor. It's not really that bad of a process. The thing is kind of heavy, so cumbersome, and you have to make sure it's aligned, so you need to push it back. Maybe putting on lug nuts would have helped. And please, no power tools yet. You might cross-thread something. Ask me how I know. So go ahead, take your time. Hand tools. No point in rushing the job and having to redo it or damage it, right? It gets expensive. Oh, while that's going on, let me tell you, well, another way I've done this before. Removing the caliper and the rotor together. This was for a different car, a 2006 Infiniti M45, and that was replacing the lower control arm. It's pretty hectic. You have to pretty much disassemble the whole front end. So, 22mm bolt, broke the top one loose, and I went ahead and broke the bottom one loose as well. But when it came time to fully remove the bolts, I only just partly backed the top one out, not all the way out, right? Still hanging there because a lot of mass is dangling. However, I completely removed the bottom one. And here you go. Then I switched back to the other part, and when I was ready to fully remove it, I made sure that my hands were ready to receive the whole assembly. That is the caliper, bracket, and the rotor all together, and picked it up and put it on the floor. But I just wanted to show you that it's possible. It's just a matter of preference and what you're able to do at the time. But yeah, we'll switch back to the Altima now.
Now we're done with the brake bracket, caliper bracket bolts. These are the 22s right here. Go ahead and tighten those. Torque them to spec. Torque wrench says it's good. Same thing on the bottom one. Likewise, torque wrench says that it's very perfect. So with that, we're going to put things away. I think we're looking at 45 minutes, tools up to tool. Well, I guess not yet until we put the wheel back on. But no, hasn't really taken long if I wasn't stopping to do any video recording and all that. So let's button it back up.
So we're pretty much done. We're going to put everything back together. Do not forget your brake hose clip, because you don't want that loose and rubbing around, and it might develop a leak, and that could be dangerous. So, as I said, pretty much ready. Oh, look at that clock. I'm going to have to tell a story about that clock. First, we're going to put the wheel back on, and I made my brother wait before lifting the car at all. This was for safety. So, as I said, just put the wheel, have it kind of secure there. You don't have to tighten the hell out of it, but just be steady.
The reason I did that is in case something happens, like a drop, you want to at least have a way for it to land on itself.
Luckily, like 99% of the times I've done this work, nothing fell off, the car did not fall off the jack, and we did not have to test my theory. But still, I don't like taking chances with my life and my safety, right? All right, now we're going to do the test drive. So at this point, he still has the TCS and ABS lights on as a result of the last bearing, which is bad, right? Those codes hang on for a little while. But see, he's turning around, because usually by that distance, you can already tell if the problem has been fixed. Oh, I take it he's a happy camper. So let me tell you guys some stories. So the first question is, well, you've heard me say that this is about the 4th time I'm doing this job, right? And this is kind of a new piece, right? Why did I even have to remove it, right? You would notice in the video that I removed something that looks rather new. And I even mentioned that that's why it was pretty easy to remove. So let me get the old piece first. The very original one that I'd been on the car for maybe 100,000 miles. I can't remember how many miles my brother's car has, and it's kind of too late to call him right now. So this was the original one, the one he hit a curb with, and it was making noise. He hit it, and over the period of 2 days, the noise just got louder. But then he drove on it for about 4 to 5 days, but it did not get any worse. So it just exponentially got loud and then just stopped. So what we did was went online
and using part number, bought one for the Nissan Altima. The 4 cylinders use a different one than the 6 cylinders. So this is what we ended up with, right? Installed that, and almost immediately his ABS and TCS light came on. As you can see, there are differences, but they did not look structurally or functionally different. And I think I was reading that maybe the hub, the rotor part of it, the magnetic part of it that sends the signal to the ABS sensor might have been damaged. Anyway, so we installed it, and immediately those lights came on. So we were worried, what the hell happened? So we put the old one back on, and he drove for a short distance, and yeah, sure enough, the light disappeared. So I knew that I had not damaged the ABS sensor. I mean, I was pretty careful about that. And so what we did was, we didn't want to deal with the noise and the risk of some mechanical damage happening and the wheel falling. We said we're going to reinstall this old one. And we did. And sure enough, there was no noise, but the lights were on. So anyway, we ordered yet another one from eBay. And that's why in the videos you'll see me removing a perfectly good looking part. Hope that makes sense. Yes, the clock. The intention of the clock is that I use it for most of my projects, especially when I'm recording a rather involving task. And the reason is that I want to accurately report how much time it takes so that you can look at the clock and say, well, it started at 4 p.m. and it ended at 5 p.m. So that makes sense. However, time and time again, as soon as I start recording, I'm soon reminded that no, I cannot do both of those. I cannot both record the clock and record the task that I'm doing. So at the end of the day, I either record neither one of them, or I just choose, which I hope is it's a wiser choice, recording the work that I'm doing. So the best I can do is just report that, hey, it took me 1 hour to do this job. However, this clock, I left it there for another reason. Funny if you think about it. But typically, you know, some people do righty-tighty, lefty-loosey whenever they're thinking about fasteners, right? And also for bolts, basically clockwise tightens, for standard threads, right? Clockwise tightens and counterclockwise loosens the bolt. However, when you're working on pieces that are on the other side, you know, places that you cannot see, it's actually reverse. So putting that clock there actually was kind of a reminder for me that said, no, in this case, clockwise is actually loosening it. You know, if you're using a ratchet, it makes sense. Just set the ratchet to the right direction and it goes. But when you're using something like a breaker bar, sometimes you might frustrate yourself wondering, why the hell is this not coming loose? No, it's because you're tightening it while you think you're loosening it. That's why I like clocks. Maybe one day I'll be able to use the technology, either the technology or find a clock small enough that I can actually have in frame when I'm recording my videos. But I think that's actually something that's really important whenever you do a task, because, you know, people make YouTube videos and I skip and fast forward through all my work, and then in 20 minutes I have the work done. But in reality, you know, it's a 3-hour job or something like that. So as I said, it's just something that I do to try and be honest and accurate in my representation of the work that I'm doing. Good luck to all of you. And if you got any tips on what to do with that clock issue, let me know.